I'd like to go now and bring in another friend of ours who's had extraordinary purpose throughout his career, is a leader in fighting the digital divide, but comes from many years working with the telecommunications industry, in government, the department. He was the former Assistant Secretary of Commerce, head of the NTIA a number of years ago. And actually, Larry Irving and I met when I had just completed my undergraduate degree at Northwestern University and was still helping to run an event I founded as an undergrad. Yes, I've been doing this for, well, a little while, since the last century, why don't we say. So the last time Larry and I worked together on something like this, in fact, the last time we saw each other in person was 1993. Larry, that might be a shocker to you. I looked it up. You spoke for us in 1993 at Northwestern, and as a great Northwestern alum, you're always there to support. And I also believe Larry just recently became the head of the Alumni Association at Northwestern University. And so thanks so much for joining us. We've got about 18 minutes to have a chat, and I know that 18 minutes isn't a lot of time, but you're the expert, so you can get this big issues consolidated for all of us, because in order to conquer this digital divide, we all have a role to play. So let's start with where we are right now. First of all, how are you doing through all of this personally?
I'm doing well, but I'm on the right side of the divide. I've got a gig network running down my street. I've got I've got more devices going on than most people have in a lifetime. I got 5 devices right within arm's reach. But it's become more important. My wife and I, it was great listening to Izzy. My wife is actually a recently frocked pastor. She's a Northwestern grad who went back and got her divinity degree. So the whole question of the host. Pre-filled host that Izzy was talking about is great, but she's doing a lot of work with her flock online. And then you realize that some people you can't reach, and some people you really need to reach, you can't reach because they just don't have the tools and technology that all of us take for granted. I mean, I'm doing well. I've got a trustees meeting for Northwestern later this week. It'll all be via Zoom. We had alumni, so my clients I do via Zoom, but I really worry about those folks who, particularly at this time, who shouldn't be having human contact because of the disease, or on the wrong side of that divide.
Yeah, I mean, I'm keeping an eye out through our Twinians on various parts of the world, and this is particularly challenging in developing countries where often the infrastructure, healthcare, telecommunications are a little bit even more fraught for many people. But here in the United States, when we look at the data, when we really open our minds to what's going on, it's actually quite shocking how significant the divides are with respect to access to this kind of technology is becoming a utility that everybody needs access to. So tell us a little bit first, how has the pandemic affected this digital divide issue?
The pandemic's had 2 interesting impacts. One, it's made it worse for a lot of people. Over 30% of American school children don't have access to the internet at a time when almost every school child is going to be doing getting an education like this. 1 out of 4 people over 65, the people who are most likely to need to stay away from other folks because of pre-existing conditions or because they're elderly, 1 out of 4 Americans, 27% who are elderly, don't have access to the internet. Folks who make over $100,000 are 16 times more likely to have broadband access than people who make less than $30,000.
Did you say 16? 1/6?
1/6 times. The very lowest income versus the very highest income, it's a 16x spread. That's the kind of problem we have in America. And if you make over $100,000, about a 93% likelihood of having access. Folks under 15,000, some of those folks, we're talking about below in 10% range for some of those families. This is insanity. And I'll give you another example. In my hometown of New York City, small businesses are increasingly reliant on the internet. 40% of small businesses don't have access to a gig network in New York City. They have access to maybe some kind of an inferior network, but not to the kind of capacious networks that businesses need to survive. That's in the biggest city, in the richest country on the planet. We still have 4 in 10 businesses don't have access to the internet. And you start looking at those statistics and it's horrifying. But here's the good news, because there's always time for good news. The good news is we're finally paying attention to it. the way you started it, that this is no longer a luxury, that we know people need access. We have finally gotten to the point as a country, and I think as a planet, to stop thinking about the internet and broadband as Netflix, but really understanding that it's about healthcare and education and commerce and keeping families connected. My mom is my mom's 90 years old. She's in assisted living because she can't live by herself anymore. And she can stay in touch with her grandchildren and great grandchildren via FaceTime and via, she can't get the hugs, but she can at least get the virtual hugs. Think of all the families where the virtual hugs aren't possible, not because they don't love each other, but because they need to stay distant to keep from infecting each other, and they don't have the technology to stay connected. It's so important. And it's been important for a long time. We're just finally realizing it.
Well, I mean, it is an issue you'd think that would bring everybody together, because in terms of if you do the math, I would imagine the impact of a relatively modest, not insignificant, but a relatively modest investment in access compared to the potential for impact of long-term prosperity. So in a second, I'd love for you to share with us the impact that crossing this divide could have on longer-term prosperity here. But just to opine for one moment, anybody who talks about liberty in America, anybody who talks about self-reliance, who talks about entrepreneurship, who talks about stepping up, bootstrapping, making things happen, well, let's give people the tools to even do that. And if you give them the tools to do it, then at least they've got a shot. So tell us how this relates to long-term prosperity.
I'll give you one example. GoDaddy did a survey over this year of micro businesses. One of the things about this pandemic is the number of small businesses that have closed because people can't go to the store, the bodega, or shopping, whatever. All of us doing a lot more commerce online. GoDaddy has found that micro businesses, micro ventures, are thriving in this era by taking some of the things they used to do offline and bringing it online. And those cities and communities that are investing in the state of Minnesota, I was on with Neela, who is one of the economic development heads in the state of Minnesota, on a GoDaddy The Hill panel last week, and listening to her talk about what's happening with micro businesses and small businesses and businesses online was amazing. I mean, I have a commercial relationship with a company called Comment Soul. And basically, it's live streaming commerce online. 16,000 businesses, and these businesses are growing like kudzu because they're using the tools that are available. Whatever has happened in this country in terms of commerce up till today, I can assure you that commerce in this country post-pandemic will look very, very different than it did. The malls are closing, stores are closing, and that is horrible. People are losing jobs, but on the other hand, the resilience of America, the resilience of our economy, the benefit of technology is that people will retrofit and rethink how to do these things. We're going to see a surge in how do we educate our children? How do we rethink education? It's not going to look in 2022 like it did in 2018. We're going to see a change in medicine. How do we get access to people physically using these tools without having to put our first line medical providers in risk of harm of getting infected. Telemedicine helps with that. We're going to change how we make commercial decisions into what we buy and how we buy it. All of that's happening, and it can only happen for all of us if all of us are connected. You can't have a third of the nation that's not part of this revolution as this revolution happens in real time. And one of the things we've got to get past as a country is the concept that the digital divide is a rural issue. There are 5 million American families who don't have access to the internet because they live in a place where it's just too expensive or too difficult to get broadband pipes.
Larry, did you say 5 million families in the United States?
5 million families in the United States.
And these are mostly in rural areas that do not have this access.
5 million households can't get access because it's just, they live on a mountain, they live, places where there are more cows than people. It's hard to get internet there. But there are 20 million American households that don't have internet because they can't afford it. And that number was pre-pandemic. And we found ways through the telephone, the water, the electricity, the roads, all of these different revolutions, we found ways to make sure that there was some access for those who had either geographically distant or low income.
Well, so talking about the will and the ability and the action and swinging the axe, as Izzy said, what is the role from your perspective of government versus private sector, or government with private sector? How do those fall?
Given the pace of change, you wouldn't want government to be the primary provider of building these networks. But certainly when there are market failures, either because you can't afford things or when people are geographically distant, the market incentives aren't there to build out to them, that's when government takes over. And the other thing that government has done an incredible job of, in 1992 when I met you, we were just talking about connecting every school, every hospital, every library to the internet. We did that job.
I remember that. I remember you were, and that, by the way, just to give people context, 1992-93 was just before the Netscape Mosaic browser came out.
Yep.
So the World Wide Web had not arrived yet, and the push was already on to try and make this happen.
And one of the things you have to remember, so today, as I'm speaking to you, over 4 billion people are connected to the internet. The last time we spoke, under 20 million people were connected to the internet. We've gone from 20 million to 4 billion in a 27-year period of time, and billions of dollars by private sector have been spent. But we've also had government expenditure to connect public institutions. Where I live on this street, there are kids in my street who go to a school down the block, and that school's a great school, and the kids on my block have a gig. There are other kids in that school who get subsidized almost broadband. It's a really light broadband for $10, but at least they have something. It's not enough to do Zoom, but they do have something. And then there are other kids in that school that have no internet connection when they go home. In DC, up to 40% of some schools, of the kids in some schools in DC have no internet at all. Detroit, 40%. Baltimore, 40%. New York City, there are 100,000 homeless kids in New York City. If they don't have a home, you almost certainly don't have an internet connection. We could connect every school in this country right now, take that broadband internet network, every library, take that broadband internet network, stick an antenna on top of that institution, and then use a wireless technology to connect kids in school or low-income people for free. We've got to rethink, if we really want to connect kids, there's a huge need for devices. And we have to stop thinking of things as just eleemosynary. Even poor people in America, in the United States, have some level of wealth. And if you bring prices down and create products that aren't inferior products, but are products that are designed for that cohort, you can do very well. I remember when I did a .com back in 1999, 2000 with Magic Johnson. And our whole precept was the telecom industry was trying to sell more computers to people who already had computers, and was completely not thinking about people who didn't have computers. You couldn't sell another computer in 1999 to a white guy with a blue shirt and khakis. Every white guy with a blue shirt and khakis already had.
No offense taken, by the way, Larry.
But, one of the things that the cellular industry and the wireless industry figured out was, these folks in Black communities and brown communities, low-income communities, they want to be connected too. And you didn't see a Verizon or an AT&T commercial that didn't also, have a little flavor. Have a hip hop beat to it. They understood that if we're going to sell these, we need to have an expansive marketplace. There isn't a family in this country that doesn't want access. We can use some commercial imperatives, and for those families who don't, we're going to have some government subsidies. But we can also find ways to bring prices down. We can also find out what are the real needs. One of the things I was born into projects. I grew up in a tough neighborhood. People don't want to be talked down to. They don't want an inferior product, but they do want a product that serves their needs. And that's the thing that business needs to figure out. And that's, a guy like Izzy could give a lot of insight to the folks at Apple and I'm a former HP exec at Apple, HP, Dell, and those companies about how do you really meet the customer where they are? And unfortunately, big tech isn't necessarily meeting the companies where they are, but there would be no Twitter if not for Black Twitter. And Black Facebook is a whole different experience than regular Facebook because these communities do care. And if you look at the way Latinos embrace new technology and Asian Americans embrace new technology, it's a different flavor, but it adds to what makes America great. They're bringing.
Well, I'd love to offer. This is fascinating, and I'm seeing so many connections come together. So Nellie Galan, who's with us for In the Room later on today, a great Twinian for a number of years. She is the can I call her poster child for Latina entrepreneurs, for women empowerment as entrepreneurs. She would have a lot to say about this. Of course, we could bring Izzy in. There are others that we can talk with, but also corporates. I remember back to Nicholas Negroponte's one laptop per child. And while it didn't succeed, and I kind of get annoyed when people say, well, it didn't succeed. Well, what was his objective? Let's get an inexpensive laptop to every kid in the world. If you don't quite hit that target, he did make some impact, but it wasn't the direct impact as much as the cattle prod that it put for the technology industry. So because of one laptop per child, when they started getting a little bit of success of creating a much cheaper but still capable piece of equipment, Intel, Microsoft, Dell, everybody started running around and saying, oh my gosh, we better be in this game and figure it out. So I think if we go to, say, our friends at IBM, who are one of our sponsors here for Twin Tech, or we go to Salesforce, one of Teddy Zmiral is one of our Twinians, and start to talk about, is there a moonshot here in America? Mm-hmm. Is there a moonshot for low cost but capable technology that could, in the longer run, benefit the technology industry?
Yep.
But also help to bridge this divide. And that's something that I'm surprised the industry, perhaps they're already working on it. Are you seeing any movement like this?
I've not seen that movement, and count me in for that movement. I'm leaning forward anywhere I can be helpful, but I want to give one other way to think about this in addition to the United States.
Great.
There are 1.7 billion school children, K through 12 school children on the planet. 1.7 billion. Almost 500 million of those kids are out of school and not connected to the internet. Think about that number. 500 million school children ages K through 12 who aren't in school and not connected to the internet right now. The concept of, and various places, the International Telecommunications
Union. So 500 million of 1.7 billion in the world.
Yes.
So at risk of embarrassing myself, not quite 30% of all the kids that we would love to be in school.
Exactly.
Are not in school.
And many of those kids are already behind, right? Because they've had a learning loss because they went out of school in March, so they haven't been back in school for almost a year. And too many of those children are girls or young women. And of that 500 million, 100 million Sub-Saharan Africa has 120 million kids who aren't in school right now and don't have connectivity. When you think of, talk about a moonshot, can we really afford to lose a generation of 500 million kids with the wealth on this planet, with the connectivity capability, with organizations like UNICEF, the UN, ITU, GIGA, World Wide Web Foundation, Tim Berners-Lee organization? We can do better. And again, somebody's going to spend the money to connect these kids, so there is a business opportunity as well.
Well, so many people are coming to mind. Vivek Wadhwa, our great friend out in Silicon Valley. You know, Vivek, he never pulled.
Sorry.
That's right. He never pulls punches, does he?
No, he does not.
He's fabulous. I mean, this is a topic that he's been engaged with in India, and talk about a challenge that is an order of magnitude larger than ours. But we can learn from each other. We can engage with each other. So, in your years of tackling this issue, what's something that has surprised you? Something that maybe you didn't expect at the beginning, and it good or bad, and what can we learn from it?
How fast the pace of change is in technology. And we were talking about dial-up. When you and I met in 1993 and we were talking about dial-up, we were excited. Just the World Wide Web, you could actually find access to where we are now, where you can get any information. Think of the number of people who are watching this on a broadband connection somewhere on the planet that had no idea 27 years ago the internet existed. The pace, and so many of them are wireless. I mean, we did not see the pace of computing power going so fast, wireless going so fast, fiber optic cables running through the line. And when you get that conversion, and a whole bunch of folks who are digital natives who never knew a time when this didn't exist, who just assumed that they can do more exciting and better things. So the danger of that is the digital divide we were talking about before was either you were on or not on. The digital divide of the future is you don't have access to broadband, or you can't use AI, or you don't have instantaneous access to telemedicine. So the divide that I worried about in the mid-90s was a concern. The divide you could see in the mid-2020s is a huge concern because the haves will have so much more than the have-nots as this technology moves at pace. So The great thing is we've seen incredible developments. The bad thing is we're leaving a lot of people on this planet and in this country further and further behind as we don't address the divide.
So Larry, we've got to go, unfortunately. I hope you'll stick with us at Twin. I'm going to reconnect in October after I've recovered from this, and let's talk. But to sign off, I'd like you to share with us 3 words how you feel about the future. 3 words, how you feel about the future. Don't explain them, just share the 3 words, and hyphens are acceptable.
Cautiously optimistic, blessed.
Cautiously optimistic, blessed. Larry, there's always time for some good news. You've brought us a challenge, but also some of the paths to a better future. Thanks so much for all you do. We'll be back in touch in October.
I look forward to it. Thanks so much, Rob. Bye-bye.
Great.